welcome you all. So the International Council for Media Literacy, we like to host 2 events that we open up to all who can join us from wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in. So we thank you for joining us from all the different times and places. And we do this with the idea of continuing or building the conversations that we're growing throughout the year with our theme. And so our theme this year for our call for proposals, which we are going to introduce today. In fact, I will put it in the chat now, and I'll put it in again later. For our winter media literacy, Journal of Media Literacy, is Democracy by Collision or Connection, the Crisis of the Public Commons. And it's going to be co-edited by Michael Hooksman and Maria Luisa Zaria, who is with us on the call. Maria Luisa is here with us. And she is going to help respond to Antonio and maybe make some connections to our hopes for the theme of the journal. Let me get that. I'm not very good at doing 2 things at once. There you go. So there I have the call for proposal in the chat for you. And so we knew immediately, even before the theme got completed, that we knew that Antonio's work in Ecomedia Literacy absolutely connects, and I think he's going to do a beautiful job of connecting this today to the concept of the public commons. So I'm going to just turn it over to Antonio right away, and he's going to present to us, and then we will open it up for some discussion. So thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you, Karen. It's so great to see old friends, but also new friends. And I'm here in Rome. It's about 5 and it's evening. I'm dealing with a little bit of allergies, so please forgive me if I have a cough here and there. Let me do a screen share. See, there we go. Okay. So I want to apologize in advance. I'm going to just do a 15-minute introduction. In some ways, a lot of the concepts I want to talk about require more depth and subtlety than what I'm going to offer, because I just want to give a basic introduction and overview. Also, I have to admit that this presentation is not super sexy. So please bear with me. I try not to bore you to death, but because I have some definitions that I really want to get through, which are important, that are very foundational. All right, so it is, I think Earth Day officially was yesterday, correct? And anyways, this is in honor of Earth Day, and every day is Earth Day, of course. So I always like to start with this graphic. Let's see, okay, Zoom is covering up the right side of this, so I'm going to close those, move this image here, so hopefully you can see it, but you can, I just want to, I do this every day, every time I present now, just remind us why we're talking about this. Here we are, and you know, the exponential growth of CO2 and greenhouse gases and the rising temperatures are just going to be affecting all of us in many ways that we haven't yet grappled with, and we just really need to jump into this and talk about it all the time, every day. And so I really want to thank Karen, because you've really, and Belina as well, and my other colleagues who are in this meeting, to be putting this in the forefront. So thank you. I greatly appreciate that you are foregrounding this. Okay, so I just want to share with you some concepts. These are a few slides that some of you have seen probably a few times, because I've presented on this at various different points. And these are just basic concepts that I've developed in my work. So the first one is the Ecomedia mindprint and footprint. So the footprint specifically deals with the physical impacts of our media that often we are not aware of and we don't discuss. And just moving around this slide, you can see on the left side is the a graphic that represents conflict minerals, but it more generally represents the idea of extraction and extraction of resources, whether it's energy, minerals, et cetera, that we have that we need to make all of our gadgets and computers and TVs, et cetera. And then the book cover from Goodbye Ice Slave, which deals specifically with the labor conditions in China, where most of our gadgets are manufactured, but not just China, of course, and Mexico and Philippines and many other countries. E-waste is a big factor that is also impacting the environment in very significant ways. And then electromagnetic energy from our devices is talked about very little, but it does impact our physical health and also the health of animals and plants, et cetera. And then the data cloud, which is powered by fossil fuels. And as we ramp up AI and all these various new cloud services that are dominating our lives every day, those require massive amounts of power, and that power generally comes from fossil fuels. And we're easily outstripping the impact of the aviation industry with just our data centers. And then the mind print, which is the various different ways that media impact how we think about the environment, from how we talk about climate issues in the news or climate policy to advertising, which promotes consumerism. And most would argue consumerism is the root of most of our environmental problems. But also popular culture, films like Avatar, and other sort of important major cinema or films in Hollywood that are grappling with environmental issues. So they're part of the popular discourse. The image in the upper right is about mobilization and how media helps us connect and meet each other to take action. The graph in the middle with the pie graph shows how little coverage there is in the media. So what is not covered is a big factor in why we don't talk about issues and don't deal with them. The Story of Stuff with Annie Leonard is part of a series of animated films that are very educational and teach us about environmental issues, so we can learn a lot from the media through documentary. And then the helicopter image there is an example of climate disinformation that is spreading rampantly throughout social media. So this is kind of like the unsexy part, but I really wanted to get into some definitions because I think it's important that we define what we're talking about. So the concept of the commons is something that we talk very little about. You hear the commons is not easily defined because if you get into sort of academic definitions, a lot of people there's many variations of what they mean by the commons. But I'm taking something from J. Wallace Jasper, where he has this very basic definition of the commons is all that we share. So it could be air, water, national parks, the Arctic, waterways, beaches, civic spaces, libraries, things like that. Something that many people are not familiar with is this concept of the cultural commons, which I learned about from Chet Bowers, who was one of my PhD mentors. And the cultural commons are the uncommodified cultural activities that we depend on a daily basis, such as recipes, dances, political practices, religious, spiritual traditions, Wikipedia, language, art, literature. There's so much about human knowledge that is actually not part of the marketplace, that is not commodified, that we take for granted. I mean, can you imagine if you called up your auntie and said, "Hey, what's that lasagna recipe you made with that really good vegetarian lasagna?" And she said, "Oh, sorry, that will cost you $25 to use my recipe." We share so much information without expecting to be paid back, and this is something we take for granted. I think I wanted to highlight this. So then translating these ideas to the concept of a media commons is this idea that media and communication resources, TV, internet, newspapers, et cetera, should be treated as a shared and public good rather than being primarily controlled by corporations or governments. And it goes without saying that a robust media commons is vital for democratic participation, open exchange of ideas, and allowing for diverse voices to be heard. Some of you might wonder what is the difference between a media commons and a public sphere? I think we could talk about that in the discussion. I think I'll hold off on that, but that's something to think about. And then what is extractive media? So this is a framework that's emerging in the field that I'm involved with, which is ecomedia studies, but it's a term that's being used more and more, and hopefully it'll become more common. And I'm just going to read you the definition here, and we can talk about what that means later. So this refers to media practices that prioritize the extraction of value from communities, environments, or individuals, often exploiting these sources without providing reciprocal benefits or sustainable contributions. And this encompasses economic, cultural, environmental, and technological dimensions where media systems exploit natural resources, cultural stories, or user data for profit, frequently at the expense of the well-being of the subjects involved. And so we can draw lots of parallels of not only does the technologies we use depend on extraction of energy and resources from the environment, but also the extraction of our attention and of our privacy and of our lives. So I want to connect these things. They're not separate. So how does the media commons connect to the environment? I'm just going to give you a few examples. I think we could bring in many more. Some of these are already discussed. One is raising awareness. We need, a diverse, democratic media commons so the public can be informed about environmental problems so that we can take action and do something about it. Also, they impact how narratives are shaped. So, for example, in the US, there's still quite a bit of doubt that climate change is real or that it's caused by humans, whereas in other parts of the world, it's very clear and there's no debate. That's because certain narratives about the climate have dominated in the US media as a result of the nature of the US media versus, let's say, in Europe. And then the environmental imagination. So this could be movies, documentaries, photography, and other art, which shapes how our imagination or how we imagine our relationship with the web of life. This can cultivate connections and inspire environmental action. Also, community mobilization, another thing I mentioned before, but I think that the whole climate movement that exists today could not have existed, especially like Fridays for Future and many of the indigenous groups that are mobilizing against pipelines. They would not generate the solidarity and the support and the global awareness without having some kind of media presence. This would be primarily in social media. And then, the role that media play in the sort of the traditional idea of the fourth estate of a check against power, holding corporations and governments accountable. So in terms of having a healthy eco-media commons, when I say that, what I mean is a media commons that can address the environmental crisis that we're in. These are what I consider to be the major challenges. Greenwashing, of course, which is, the way that advertising is used to represent products as being good for the environment when they actually are not. Climate disinformation, of course, is a major problem. Going back to the point of the fact that people believe that climate change is not real or not human caused, that's the result of climate disinformation. Fossil fuel propaganda, which, fossil fuel industry has a very good and robust public relations strategy, and they're able to dominate the news cycle and, put forward their narratives and positions in the marketplace of ideas more prominently than activists can. And then business as usual, which is this is something we don't talk much about, but the way that news programming, but also advertising and popular culture sort of normalizes consumerism, normalizes the convenience of buying things and throwing things away. And then also the way that the media in general has become, increasingly more consolidated, more commercialized, and therefore more sensationalistic and more entertainment oriented, all in support of the economic status quo. So I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but the major media corporations that dominate the public sphere or the media commons are also part of the stock market. They're part of they benefit from the economic status quo, and they're the billionaire class. They're part of the 1%. Symbolic annihilation refers to how things are not discussed, how things are eliminated. So every time you see a big promotion for the next big thing like Apple product, Apple watches, is there any discussion about e-waste or the environmental consequences of making these products? I can tell you no, because this has been studied and they are not mentioned. So that is absent in the discussion. And so if something's absent, then we don't think about it. And then extractivism, and this is, I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion about this, just to say that the economic system of extractivism is based on enclosure, which is the privatization of the commons. Of course, resource extraction, that's what the name comes from. And then expandability, which has to do with declaring certain ecosystems and places as sacrifice zones, such as poor neighborhoods where polluters or oil refineries do their work, or like we can think of the Mississippi um, in as being one of the main sites of chemical production and also cancer. And disposable people, that certain populations are designated as disposable for the economy. And then the way that exploitation is promoted through labor practices and the way ecosystems are exploited, and then the negative externalization of these costs, making the public pay for this instead of the companies that produce these problems. So one of the really important lessons from people who are active in the commons movement is that if people don't know the commons exist, they won't defend it. So in a certain way, it's our job as educators to raise awareness and attention to the commons, because if people don't know this is a thing, they're not going to do anything about it. Sounds simplistic, but it's true. So what can media educators do? We're getting towards the end of my talk. So this is from an article that I co-authored with Jeff Scher, who's with us. Teresa Redmond, I don't know if you're there, but she's also one of the co-authors. And we wrote this for this book about post-pandemic futures with Jonty Friesman and others. And so these are just examples of things that we do as media educators, but they're available to us. We have the skills to talk about these things, and we can bring in the environment. For example, talking about advertising media and like how they promote planned or perceived obsolescence, and the throwaway economy, and it's easy economy where, oh, I just solve a problem, I'll just buy this new thing. And then, the implicit messages in commercial media that are prevalent about technology and about other products that don't incorporate any kind of eco-awareness. News media already discussed the problems with how the news media is dealing with the climate crisis. One intervention I see that really should be happening in the media literacy movement is we have so much about news literacy, but whenever I look at news literacy lesson plans and websites, I don't see anything about climate disinformation. So I think that's an area that we need to do a lot of work in. Teaching students, excuse me, about manufacturing and gadget design. This is a little more complex and takes more work, but basically asking students, how is your gadget made, and send them on a journey and let them sort of explore and investigate how their phones are produced. Media representations, of course, all of us are good at that. We're media educators are famous for being able to deconstruct race and gender and violence and all these other things. We can use those same tools to also talk about the environment. We can also use the same tools from critical media literacy to talk about media ideologies and to identify those dominant social, economic, and political ideologies that we see throughout popular culture, advertising, and news media. And then eco-writing, which Jeff may want to talk about at some point today, which is to use creative writing, journaling. That should be journaling, sorry for the typo. But also digital media. When we say writing, it's not just writing words in text. It could be writing with memes. It could be writing with video, PSAs, various different types of media production. So I'll end with just these questions, and then hopefully we can generate a discussion among everyone. I don't want to dominate our meeting. So I'll end with these prompts. What are ways media educators can teach about the commons? How do we direct the attention of students towards the commons, and how can we teach about the media commons using inquiry-based methods? So with that, I'm going to stop and I open the floor to discussion, or however way, Karen, you would like to proceed from here.
Well, I would like to offer the opportunity if Maria Luisa would like to introduce herself and maybe say a little something, if she's ready for that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for having me here. I'm Maria Luisa Zorrilla. I'm from Mexico. And well, I'm here because Michael Hoxman was very kind to invite me to be to participate as co-editor in the next issue of the Journal of Media Literacy. That I said I understand that will be announced later. But at the moment, well, I find that this talk is very pertinent related to this issue we will announce. And I think a lot of the things that Antonio was mentioning. And at the end, when he stated some questions, he said, what are ways media educators can teach about the commons? But I was thinking that in other societies, you are very fortunate to have these media educators. There are some countries like mine in Mexico that we are still in the way of introducing media education as part of the curriculum. It is not a common part of the curriculum. It is not a common part talking about commons. It is not a common part of our lives, the media education. So for you, the questions are what do we media educators do? And the questions we have in other places of the world are how do we start educating about media? So this is a journey I have been doing for several years. I work in a Mexican university. It's a public university. It's the Autonomous University of the state of Morelos. And we started doing MOOCs for educating around cultural about digital culture. That's where we started to talk about these topics, and we evolved from there to introducing this in the curriculum of the pre-grad studies in our university. But many people don't understand the value of these. When we restructure the programs, the plans with different academic units in our university, many people working on the curriculum say, no, we don't have space in the curriculum for that. We are very focused on disciplinary themes, disciplinary issues. So we don't have space for this digital culture education. So maybe we'll introduce one subject about this, but we are not sure. So this is the struggle we have in other places. But I find very interesting all the topics that Antonio is putting on the table, because yes, I've been reading a lot about these topics for several years, and he's right. All this discussion about the impact of media and of our gadgets in the environment is in a dark zone, and we need to bring this to the light. So thank you very much for these thoughtful ideas and reflections about this. I take with me a lot of information and good ideas to expand these activities I'm doing in my university. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Wonderful to have you. And it's wonderful to have that perspective and reminder of the diverse range of where everyone is in the media literacy field for educators. We put the I put the link to the call in the chat, so if people want to take a look at that and see that, we have a question from Marty Reala in the chat. If anybody else wants to say anything, just feel either jump in or raise your hand on, and we'll get to you. So Marty has, how do we deal with the commons in quotation marks, including racism, sexism, etc.?
My quick response, and I'd be curious to hear from others, is, from the framework of eco-justice, one of the primary subjects of eco-justice is environmental racism, but also ecofeminism is very concerned with the way that patriarchy is very much a part of the climate crisis. For example, there's this whole idea of petromasculinity, which I think is very interesting to explore, and that is the association between the extraction of energy with male identity and male sexuality, and that's a topic that really can bring out very good discussion about the inequalities between genders that result from the kind of economy we have. And anytime I'm talking about the extraction of environmental resources and environmental racism, that always connects directly with the media commons, because again, all of our gadgets, the entire system that is at the infrastructure of our media is based on petromasculinity. And then the environmental racism as well, where is the e-waste going? Where's the zones of extraction? These are people that tend to be from low-income regions of the world. There's that old saying from the 80s, if anyone remembers that far back. If the White House says it's safe, why not bury it there? Like we are always, advocating for the use of certain kinds of materials for economy, but someone has to pay the price. So, as we transition into so-called clean energy and electronic vehicles and all that, there's going to be a big boom in the extraction of lithium and other minerals that we need for our batteries. And that's going to have a big impact on regions, especially like in South America, like in the Andes, but also in the Congo and other regions of the world. So when we talk about environmental problems, racism and sexism are very much a part of that. And that's how I would connect those issues to the commons. But also, if we think of the media commons in terms of diversity, the issue of having diverse voices and diverse communities being able to have a presence in the media, those are all connected to this idea of the commons as well. Renee, do you have your hand up?
I do. I was just listening to NPR this morning talking about Texas, where they have totally killed all the DEI offices in all of the public universities, maybe the private ones too, I don't know, but it's against the law now in Texas to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Regarding Marty's question, I'm wondering if you think there's a way to inject this into our elections in any way that opens this issue up for a broader public, because if the commons are also determined by public participation and public keeping them going, do you see, is there any connection there, do you think? Or how is this movement now politicizing in a way that you think could?
I think the commons movement itself is very, what's the right word? It's very marginal. I don't think there's a lot of people. It depends where you are. So, for example, in Italy, like 10 years ago, they had a big referendum on the privatization of water. That's a commons issue. And, the people voted against privatizing water. And I know that there's a lot of debates throughout Latin America where governments are privatizing. Like in Bolivia, they were going to privatize the water, and there's a big revolution that blocked that movement. But in the U.S., I think there needs to be more political activism around this topic, but I also feel like all the problems I'm describing, if I was going to say what is the root cause of this, I would say a lack of democracy, because you know many of these problems could be resolved if we had more better government regulation. And one of the ways that you diversify the media is the government has rules in place that enforce media diversity. In the case of the US, as I think everyone here knows, I'm not sharing anything new, that in the US, the media is dominated by major private multinational corporations. There's very little space for public media. And I mean, we do have strong audience supported public media in the US, but it's a very small slice of the overall media system. So,
Yeah.
you know, if I was going to say, how do we solve these environmental problems? I would say we need media democracy. You know, we need the media reforms that people have been talking about for so long. This is not a new concept, but I would connect those issues very robustly.
Thank you, Antonio.
Mhm.
We have a little discussion going in the chat there. If you want to look, Antonio, Jeff shared comment about looking at different cultures and worldviews and embracing the notion of the commons and thinking about indigenous cultures.
Yeah, why don't you say something about that, Jeff? We co-authored an article that deals with this.
Okay, sure. And I think an important idea is, you know, what we tend to see in our dominant mainstream media is very much kind of one Western worldview. And there's so many other cultures that demonstrate other examples of different ways of thinking about society and the commons. And I'm just thinking about in Mexico, you know, so many of the different indigenous groups have built-in practices, have language, have ideas. I lived a little while in one small town in southern Mexico where this idea of consensus was kind of the ruling form of government in the village. And the idea, and they have other words. The word tequio is this notion of giving back to your community, kind of like what we think of as taxes, but it's not done with any type of negative concept. It's this idea of the joy and the desire to contribute to your community. And then looking at Latin America, a lot of indigenous groups have been pushing for these rights of nature. Ecuador in 2008 rewrote their constitution with this idea of recognizing these public commons as essential to our very survival. And so there are examples and models of people understanding the importance of the public commons. But I think in our kind of more capitalist Western worldview, we have a hard time seeing that. And so I think maybe looking for places that do have it embedded within different cultures.
Safa asked the question, why aren't we addressing the commons using the same channels through which they are misused? Well, so my quick response to that is one of the points I was trying to make before in my presentation is that people don't even know what the commons is. So let's kind of have to get over that hurdle. So, you know, I think it's good that, for example, that we're going to do this issue where we're going to sort of elevate this concept. And it is, I mean, in Europe, at least, in academic circles, the commons is a sort of very large topic that's being discussed quite a bit in journals and in conferences. I don't know how much that's happening in the US. So hopefully that will sort of infiltrate, you know, the more learned parts of society and become more part of our curricula. But I think we're kind of almost starting from zero. What I think Jeff's point is that also it's a matter of culture, you know, and if one of the things about Western culture and the US culture in particular, this is a very individualistic society, which is in many ways contrary to the idea of the commons. So the commons in a certain way is would not really enter into the media because it's antithetical to the main values that are promoted in media. Yeah, Jeff just shared an article. We both co-authored. Actually, we have two other co-authors from Ecuador, and it's about sort of combining media education with environmental issues, but also exploring the worldview of. Well, maybe Jeff, you could say a little bit about that.
Well, just kind of what we were talking about, these different cultural, different worldviews, but also one of the lovely things about this article is it's also exploring the role of poetry, because the two other authors from Ecuador are both environmental activists and poets. And so they bring in that form of media that I think is really powerful. And it's been one of their strategies for pushing back. One of the big battles right now is for water. But we're seeing that across, so much more in Latin America, where indigenous groups are on the front lines and pushing for basic public commons, basic rights for land, water, survival. And so the more I think we can be integrating these things and recognizing how much the environmental movement is a social justice issue, and it's not just something kind of that for so long has been this kind of white middle class thing. That the more we recognize the inequality of these issues, how they're impacting different groups differently, and how the inequality of responsibility and who can make the biggest changes when we focus on systemic issues, I think those are really key. But a lot of this, I think, is really based on getting at the bigger ideas of, what are the dominant ideologies, worldviews that are informing and shaping our actions and policies.
There's a question about is media literacy, it says media literacy used to be anti-media, et cetera. Is this an extension of that stance? No, I mean, I think one of the, when I first started talking about ecomedia literacy, media and the environment, there was a little bit of a pushback that it was just yet another example of protectionism in the media literacy movement. The idea that media is inherently bad. And I definitely don't have that position. I mean, by putting forward the concept of the media commons, I'm actually being somewhat utopian and saying we need to envision a democratic and pluralistic media that solves problems. And I also gave many examples of how media has been very helpful for solving at least mobilizing populations to deal with environmental problems. But I would say that my stance is definitely very critical, and absolutely, I think a critical stance it's inherent to the environmental perspective, because the system that is producing all the environmental problems is the dominant system, and there's no way that we can solve the environmental problems without being critical. So that would be my response to that question.
Mhm.
And then the question of AI, and then sorry to jump in, but I've seen two comments about AI. So I'd be curious to hear from Martin how he thinks AI is more democratic. In terms of comments, I have one critique that I would like to raise, which is that Google and OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, they are scraping from the cultural commons. They're taking publicly shared knowledge and they're privatizing it. So they're taking something that they have all these systems that they're scraping Wikipedia and the internet and taking all that knowledge and selling it back to us. So those kind of companies, I believe, are antithetical to the commons. I hope that there could be a democratic form of AI, but the way that it's being driven by Microsoft and Google, and Apple, well, I don't know how much they're involved with it, but these are some of the most powerful tech companies in the world. And I don't think they have the interest in the commons in their business models. So at this point, I don't see it, but I'd be curious to hear arguments that would contradict my views. Renee, did you want to say something?
I did. Is Marty, are you responding? I
was responding
Go ahead,
to
Renee.
Martin's comment.
Okay. What I was thinking, I live in the city, I live in New York City. So, what's nature here is Central Park and Riverside Park and all the places that we all gravitate to here and love. And they're run by conservancies. That is, there are public contributions. I'm not sure of all their funding sources. And every day in the mail, I get something from the Environmental Defense Fund to save the bees. And, I am on all those mailing lists. They don't seem to be talking to each other. I mean, they're all raising money, each in their own individual way. And is there a coalition? I mean, is there a way to strengthen this in a more unified way and that would really have more force? Because I can only give so much money to the bees. I can give to the park a little. I can do, I don't know that any of that is addressing these much larger conceptual frames that we really have to be not only teaching in our classes, but living by and legislating by and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no single solution. If you want to support bees, that's great. I think bees are amazing. We need bees. If
I
that's
like
all you do for the rest of your life, that would be an incredible contribution to the world. I mean, I think when I talk to like our students and they fall into despair, like, what can I do? And I think everyone needs to do what they're good at. Everyone has different skills. Some people are musicians, some people are accountants, some people are lawyers, some people are poets, and everyone has a role to play where it's a big symphony. In terms of like the competition of this is the part of the problem, especially in the US, where social issues have been privatized so that, all these nonprofits are competing against each other.
Yes.
And it's turned it into kind of a Hunger Games of who can extract or who can compete to get people's money for their causes. And I think it's a problem, but that's a structural issue. But in terms of like, where do I put my money? Because I donate money, and maybe it would be helpful for people to hear what I believe is to be important. I support alternative environmental media. Like there's now DSMOG is a very important investigative news website that has a big database on climate disinformation. They're journalists. They've funded by users or supporters. They don't get corporate money. So I give money to them. I give money to Democracy Now! I give money to a women's collective that plants trees in low-income regions of the world that supports women's groups, because women are a very important part of climate solutions, women's education especially. And I donate money to investigative journalism. That's, to me, like where I feel like that they need support. So that's what I do.
That concept of action goes nicely with Maria Luisa put in the comments that it's important for us to also think about how do we take action on these issues. And I don't know if you're talking about with students as well, like how do we promote that idea with our students? And that can be a challenge sometimes in schools if you are promoting taking action along. Sometimes that gets politically challenging in the US, I will say.
Well, and that's the results of really the fossil fuel industry politicizing climate action so that it is controversial. It shouldn't be controversial, but it is. And I understand why teachers wouldn't want to touch it because they don't want to get in trouble with parents. And the fossil fuel industry has a massive presence in American education. They supply textbooks and they train teachers, and they know, they go kind of to the heart of hegemony in the sense of getting into education, and they're there, and they're very, very active in education. So one thing educators should do is when their schools adapt fossil fuel curricula, they should push back against that. And people can get on school boards to, make sure that those kind of curriculum are not part of what kids are taught. But in terms of also within media literacy, I know that a lot of people don't want to bring politics into media literacy. They say, learn how to make a TV show or learn how to write an article. That's media literacy. And we're not supposed to talk about politics. But you saw, go back to the slide I showed you, where, the growth of the temperatures of climate change and gas house. We got to do something about this. It's not something that we can just, this is a big problem that a lot of people in the climate communication movement talk about is the climate of silence, the spiral of silence. So I'm sure most of the people here know what the spiral of silence is, but the idea that people don't want to speak about something because they're afraid that it's too controversial and other people might ridicule them or ostracize them. So they don't say anything. And so we're in a mess now because we don't talk about it. So one of the proposed solutions, as simplistic as it sounds, is to have climate conversations, to talk about the climate. It doesn't even have to be sophisticated discussion, but to raise it, to make it present, that people are not afraid to speak about it. Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd love to bring together some of the things that I've been hearing and some of the questions. Maria Luisa asked the question about, well, how are we going to get teachers to do this when they're overwhelmed with the number of things that we need to teach? And I think Renee or others raised the question of the politicizing of media literacy, potentially DEI, SEL, et cetera. So I want to suggest, and the importance, Jeff, of raising these different perspectives, different ideological views with students. I think we can bring them together from a media literacy perspective when we approach it from an inquiry-based pedagogy that has the teacher present through engaging media different perspectives and points of view with key questions that get students to inquire, to question, to think, and to ask their own questions about different presentations, different views, and to think critically. And the analysis that we've been doing across the country is that while certain language has become wokeified, critical thinking still is in the standards. It is still supported, and it has not become the buzzword. It may. So for us to kind of work with teachers around how to teach to their core content, whether it's math, English, social studies, science, to integrate questions about the environment from different perspectives through students analyzing and evaluating and sharing their own perspectives and thinking critically about this gives us leverage points that can bypass and address some of those challenges. So again, from Maria's perspective, this has got to be curriculum-based. It's got to be teaching what teachers are already teaching in an effective, engaging way that will bring more students in. From Jeff's comment, it has to also at times engage students in reflecting on very different perspectives and on the kind of value systems and ideologies behind those. And I think it also needs to address some of the politicized language we're dealing with now so that people see this as core to critical thinking education for democracy that all of a sudden students need, as opposed to us pushing one particular agenda.
Thank you, Chris. That was a wonderful wrap up there.
That was it right there. By the way, Chris posted a link to all the Project Look Sharp curricula around environment. I've studied a lot of those. They're quite good. So if you haven't seen those, you really should check that out.
And those are just the ones on Indigenous. If you put in environment, you're going to get hundreds. Climate change, you'll get 60 for teaching specific core curriculum. So those are the ones, Jeff, around Indigenous perspectives on environmental issues through media literacy.
Well, thank you so much. We are at 10:55, and I did, so you've had in the chat a couple times the call for proposals that we would love for you. We're just putting out today or announcing this week for our Journal of Media Literacy, the winter 2024 issue. So it'll come out in December, and we will have several conversations like this throughout the year about this topic of democracy by collision or connection, the crisis of the public commons. And we do have Michael Hooksman joined us, and Maria Luisa, who are both our co-editors. So I'll give them just a moment if they'd like to say something.
I think Michael is not connected. No.
I know he might be.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so
But has Maria
okay.
Luisa had a chance to present?
Yes.
You go ahead, Maria Luisa.
Oh, Michael, I would prefer you to present, please.
Okay, well, just thank you, Antonio, and thanks to the rest of you for a fulsome conversation, and obviously to express some of the urgency of these matters in our times. We're not dealing with neutral questions, and the world is changing at an alarming pace right now, and so we want to respect and find a place for this question of not just eco-media literacy, but also the climate crisis. And yet the journal issue is a broader call to look at really what has become of this public space, the public sphere, the public commons, in an era of increased monetization of this thing called the internet. Like in these last couple of decades, we saw a movement of, you know, the most powerful conversations of the day from the traditional media, and let's even say from, you know, just tables and rooms and chambers, you know, the ways that people have had discussions historically, onto the internet. And so the internet has had some impact. And what one of the concerns is that it's a declining space, and it's a monetized space, and it's also a walled garden. It's a place where certain things, you know, the decision of who gets permitted to say what is made by some powerfully vested interests. And so we no longer have sort of a place that we can converse. And yet the notion that there was ever a neutral space where everybody had a role in the conversation is that one that we take issue with. In other words, the internet did open up space. It did open up space. The Web 2.0 opened up space for communities that have always been marginalized in some manner or oppressed, but were not part of the ongoing conversation, could have voice. And the best example from the place I sit right here in Canada is Indigenous experiences, histories, epistemologies. We know so much more today in 2024 than we did in 2003 when we talk about this beginning of Web 2.0. So where we're trying to go here is a couple of different places. One is to talk about what it is to talk in that constrained world, in that shrinking public commons, in that commodified public commons. And the other is to find out, well, what voices are there, and to give them those voices space. So we are actually looking at trying to develop what might be an empowered commons. So it's a sort of a two-part thing. It's to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? And the other is, hey, wait a minute, what can we do?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I thank you so much, and we're excited. And please share the call with anyone and all that you know, with all of your networks. And then I will have Belina will just one last pitch, and I'll put the link in there for our the International Media Literacy Research Symposium in June, and that will end with that.
Hi, everyone. Yes. We have quite an array of speakers. I actually was doing the final count as of today. We have 140 people in attendance. Antonio is going to be one of our keynotes, which we're really excited about. And actually, I think it's a great conversation because he'll be with Sally Reynolds, who's from Belgium, and from David Buckingham as well, they're going to be sitting on a panel together, really discussing some of the issues about media literacy and things. Where are we? Where are we not? Where aren't we getting? I think actually this adds an extra layer to the conversation. But there's a wonderful plethora of presenters, and the schedule is out. If anyone is interested, you can actually go to the website and see it. It's getting tweaked every single day, though I have to be honest and tell you. Every day I get like another like notation about something. And then there's actually another version of this that has our Marilee Rowe Award winners as well as our Jesse McCann's winners. And that one is not actually viewable to the public until June because we haven't notified people yet. But if you are in the area, want to come to the Azores, please come and join us. It is sure to be a really interesting and lively event.
Thank you so much. And so with that, we do have to say goodbye because I have some 4-year-olds in the library right out there waiting for me. So I thank you so much for joining us for our spring network meeting. And again, we'll have another one in the fall, but thank you to Antonio for an amazing presentation and for Maria Luisa for joining us and sharing your thoughts as well. And all of you who have shared so many rich things. This will be recorded and edited and shared. So we will share all of your resources as well. Again, thank you all and take care.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice to see everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.